a short story writer, and I am greatly influenced by music. So I'm going to do an intro for each of 3 excerpts of short stories. And they each have a 10-second musical introduction.
Cool.
Bear with me. Blue Oyster Cult, then came the last days of May. This story is called 2.5 versus Fortune. The night Chrissy and the 2 men were in the town park, Blue Oyster Cult's fantasy guitars were close as the summer air. Although some teenage girls would never wear peacock feather earrings, in the starless part of the evening, Chrissy crossed her legs against the shine of the car and let the blue-green spell the exotic in her own eyes. Her manicure was as fine as any rich girl's in her high school, and so candy apple that her boyfriend Joey warned her of the consequences of brushing vinyl with wet nails. But that night, he was far away from thoughts of auto upholstery. He was hypnotizing his best friend Graham. Hitch pine branches hovered overhead, and their falling needles made Chrissy shiver. "Kiss him, Chrissy," her boyfriend commanded her. "It's the right thing to do." And because she was tough, she let Graham bend her body back. Graham's mouth had met the air with its own heat, sliding off the gloss of hers. Only when his hand sprawled over her bare back did Joey order him to release her. "Jesus," Graham's empty arms collapsed. "This is what we'll do," Joey said, as if microphones were arrayed before him. Chrissy curled herself up next to the wheel well. In the dark, it was impossible to see where the airbrushing ended and the waves of her hair began. Joey tucked a cigarette behind his ear, and beneath the anthem to a dead dope dealer, he announced to his audience, "I met a guy who's going to be a friend." "What kind of chick do you have?" Graham breathed. "Let's talk about money instead. Dope money or car money?" Joey ran his hand across the shimmering hood of his car, and pine needles slithered off, but none like this. "What's the deal?" "I'm fixing caddies over in the Highlands." This part Chrissy remembered from last weekend at the drive-in. Joey's shirt had fallen across her as he revealed the name of the dealership where he could be found. Behind him on screen, a starlet clasped her hand over her mouth. She had fatally paused from fleeing the killer. "There's no time," Chrissy tensed. "Keep going." But it was 1976, and girls still hadn't outrun their tormentors yet. She knew all about horror. She was still in high school. Joey had dropped out of her Jersey Shore high school 10 years ago, but still cruised by in the same car. He was even from Chrissy's neighborhood, where wooden houses were bordered by frayed forsythia and grass weaving between leaning fences. "I know your house," he told her on their first date. "There were stray cats in the garage." "Now there's one in the house," she responded. It wasn't the first time he'd kissed her, but the hardest. It was only when his car wheeled into a neon-lit parking lot that she had hesitated. He held the car door open. "They'll let you in," he promised. "You're with me." The bouncer just asked Joey for Raceway Park odds, either because he truly had a friend with a Corvette, or he wanted to gape at what there was of Chrissy's white mini dress. It was the brunette bartender who asked if Chrissy were old enough to drink. "If she was, she wouldn't be here with me," Joey replied. The bartender glowered as he shot her a jet of Coke into a glass. They watched a heavy metal cover band while the men nearest watched Chrissy. The air was part salt, part smoke, and when Joey had his tongue in her mouth during the encore, she had felt like she was on stage. Joey's initials began to appear inside the heart she drew on her paper bag book covers. She brushed her hair in a hypnotic state. It seemed her mind had never so much to remember before. She was freed from her high school isolation by his Buccaneer Red GTO. Joey would drive her to their private part of the public beach to spend each lengthening twilight. Afterwards, when she walked up her cement steps past the ragged edges of the juniper bushes, she sometimes would step down instead, rest her head on the banister, and watch the late part of the night go by. The white curtains of her room swayed upstairs. No one there yet. Horses to look at, and that was Chris Christopherson, Sunday morning coming down. Casey lurched up one basement step at a time, his hand clutching a banister made of a metal pole. An armful of 2x4s slid under his other arm, splinters catching his shirt. He braced himself against the wall and let his lungs fill again, while scrubbing the spider webs caught on his fingers. He would have washed his hands if he ever reached the kitchen, but his water had been cut off. Above him, the light from a latched window spread into a cone across the linoleum. He was still 7 steps of torn carpet down. The boards, so old they no longer smelled of pine but of rot, had edges sharp enough to gouge the pulp of his palm. He would not turn his head to see the basement he had left, just like he would switch off the TV news when the too graphic disclaimer appeared before stories of war and starvation. He bled for all documented misery, for his own New York State home was staked with the plague cross of foreclosure. He would never see his basement again, the shoebox windows shadowed in part dark earth. He had left the dartboard hanging even when the furnace stayed cold. He had once planned a wall of gem-colored bottles. He had to get upstairs. His imagination was too loud without a remote to turn it off. He pressed his weight against the wall, the banister digging at his side, wishing he could drop to his knees and crawl the remainder. He focused on the mimosa tree outside the kitchen window, its leaves feathered as a bird's, threads of pink flowers that dissipated at a touch. He pulled himself up a next step closer. His heart was swollen, a fist of blood and muscle slow to engage, a faulty pump, a rattling furnace. He sweat with cold, his fingers trembled under their load of boards. He knew the numbness was coming, a prickling warning that his blood was evacuating his body as it was demanded by his brain. He dragged up one more. A board loosed itself to slalom down the steps. Tears shot into his eyes. He could almost smell the frost of the kitchen just 5 scraping stair steps away. His breath was as thin as if he were on a mountaintop. On a History Channel, he had witnessed a reenactment of a pioneer family who'd taken the long way around the Cascades into the wilds of the Pacific coast. The father careened through the mountain passes and dodged Indian arrows just to fall sick on the other side. It was so cold when they crossed and more snow in Oregon. His wife's raw hands nursed his illness, no other doctor to tend him. She swapped away one possession after another to an Indian tribe for corn that he alone in the family could not eat. They had suffered all this for a homestead. He wondered if the man died, imagining the cabin he could never build for his family. Casey had thought of that kind of loyalty for years. He had followed the shadowy eyes of the girl behind the steward's counter, her eyes the color of the root beer he drank so cold and sweet it burned his throat. Where'd she come from? He asked the owner. Fresh Air Fund sent her from Brooklyn, too young for you. I can wait. Casey sat at the counter every day to listen to Mariana's accent, a cadence that should have been describing white sand beaches beneath ocean blue skies. Instead, she spellbound him as she described the decaying walls of her project, the hurtling speed of the subway, and the sprawling school as large and lawless as the neighborhood around it. Beneath her apron, her acid-wash jeans fit too tight, and her t-shirt halfway ripped revealed gold chains of tribute circling her neck. He smiled to picture himself as the kind of hood who would snatch jewelry off the street for her. Until the morning he left his shirt open like he just left a weight room. He ignored his neighbors jeering over their glazed donuts. Only at Mariana's raised eyebrow, he buttoned back up. "Can I take her out?" he asked the summer she returned, taller and ringed in black market gold. Casey had dallied during the year, but this had only spun out his desire across a span of brocade bedspreads, assuaged by neither virtuous blonde nor vicious brunette. He saw beneath their spectrum of eyeshadow that they were bored of their mountainous land, the farms and the forests. Their convenience store lottery tickets would never scratch off a win big enough to satiate their own ambition. In the spell of desire, he checked his rearview mirror, that his shave was good and his shoulders broad, and that seemed enough, with a truck and a paycheck, to seduce what fireflies stayed out late at night. This is the last of the 3 excerpts. If you've enjoyed any of them, please let me know, and I can let you know where you can see them in print. These are all published or going to be published. Captain Beefheart, Electricity. This is titled The Only Explanation for Electricity. And when DeJane finally stomped back on stage, he was fronting a band that still resented him 6 months after his medical discharge. There was nothing to do but wrap his only hand around the microphone stand and wait for the buzz of amplification to do to his nerves what mezcal did to his body. His hand was scabbed, mostly across his knuckles, but he gripped the microphone's neck to force his words down. His combat boots were steady on stage because he liked being high up, better to see the enemy, but now he was just checking out the kind of chicks who'd never slept in rollers. When he started to sing, he wanted them to catch their breath in the cigarette smoke falling from the ceiling. He waited for his guitarist to start the song that had made them famous briefly, and kept waiting. Brody was making him hang. DeJane had never shanghaied his guitarist, though Rolling Stone spread a rumor how he'd stirred peyote into Brody's beer in a San Bernardino bar, then locked the door. Through the window, Brody swore he saw cacti exploding into flames. DeJane assured him that he wouldn't catch fire as long as he kept playing his blue Stratocaster, the color of a chlorinated pool. It was a good story, and DeJane had liked the rock and roll press back then. But it was not because of that 5-year-old rumor that Brody glared at him. It was the boxes of unsold records melting in a Los Angeles warehouse. The physical distance of Brody's anger was measured by 6 feet of duct tape cord between them. The bars of their last single sped away under his fingers. DeJane caught his breath, but it was too late. That song was over. The girls below shifted in their moccasins. He understood from their smooth foreheads that he was too old to be a teen idol and too amputated to be a rock star, and they were there to hear him sing because their older sisters had. If he were not going to sing, they were going back to the bar. He shouted into the microphone, trying to stop the departing train with his voice. Though his mouth was crushing the windscreen, he could not hear himself. He accused the sound man with his only forefinger. The sound man shrugged at the mysteries of the public address system. DeJane elbowed the microphone stand clattering to the stage before he tracked down his sullen guitarist. Girls hissed around their wads of juicy fruit. He slammed Brody in the shoulder, cutting off the endless solo. Brody's eyes guttered. DeJane remembered pulling the shade down over the only window in that San Bernardino bar to prevent Brody from hallucinating that the sand was burning. Since the ambient heat could have smothered a firefighter, DeJane had bought him Cokes all day. DeJane hadn't really locked the door, because on that type of peyote, it would have been impossible for Brody to find it without assistance. When they were famous, Brody would thank him. Brody did not appear inclined to do so now. If he had been seduced by the singer once, he was trying currently to drown him out with feedback. DeJane grabbed his throat and pinned him to the amplifier. One hand had grown stronger in the absence of the other, and they had both been hard. Brody tried to shake his head free, even as the fabled blue guitar loosened in his grasp. DeJane watched Brody's indigo jacket sink down the Marshall stack before he returned to the downed microphone. But when he lifted it to his mouth, its cord dangled into space. It had been severed. "You have no band," Brody rasped. DeJane cradled the microphone like it was his shot-off hand. He remembered searching for it in the jungle, beating the bushes, while torches flamed wild grass, lighting a show for dying men. Brody's coup registered only in the disconnected way a finger retreats from flame before feeling itself burn. DeJane held the mutilated microphone aloft. He could hear the audience gasp as if he held a head on a pike. He hurled it at the back wall, where it exploded over the drummer's head. Backstabbers. The bass player stepped forward, his bass hanging like a noose around his neck. "You're not going to be around anymore, are you?" "You don't have a band without me." The footlights snapped off. The audience struck matches to see the action on the darkened stage. DeJane felt in his pocket for a Zippo lighter. Without two hands, matches were useless. He struck the flint up to his own face. Girls shrieked and boys whistled. He was still on stage, but the band was gone. He strafed the stage with his lighter until his thumbs smoked. Let his mutinous band tour state fairs in the blistering California summer, along with 4-H pigs and A-cup dancers. Glasses shattered when they missed the bar. The audience was hurting.